In today's video, we're going to talk about how your subject's clothing affects your photograph. Specifically, I want to show you how clothing directs the viewer's eye throughout the frame. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here. As a portrait and fashion photographer, there are so many things that I have to consider in my image. For example, we're thinking about things like composition, lighting, background choice. But what about clothing? Believe it or not, clothing can make a really big impact on where your viewer is looking in the frame. And that's what I want to talk about today. Now, before we get into that, I want to actually back up and talk about some of the fundamentals of directing the eye in photography. So when you look at a photograph, there are certain things that the viewer will look at first. All right, so for example, we tend to look at the brightest area of the frame first. So whatever is lightest will grab our attention. We also will look at areas that are more saturated, more vibrant color. We look at areas of pattern or detail. We look at areas of contrast, like a bright highlight and a shadow where they meet. And we also look at faces. This is actually something that's instinctive. We'll look at a face in a photograph as well as in real life. It's the very first thing that we look at. But these concepts, these ideas of what directs our eye in a photograph also apply to clothing. And so I'm going to be photographing my subject in several different looks, and we're going to talk through how the clothing choices are changing where we are looking in the photograph. Now, before we look at those examples, I did want to talk a little bit about clothing choice. Clothing choice is not just about directing the eye. It's also about showing the subject's personality, showing a little bit of personal style. Maybe it's about flattering them. But today's video is not about what's right or wrong. It's not do's and don'ts of styling. For example, early on in my portrait photography, like way back in the beginning, I learned that with curvier subjects that I should put them in a solid black outfit. But the reason behind this was kind of you wanted to draw attention away from the body. And this is neither good nor bad. I mean, wearing all black, that kind of makes the person vanish. It does bring attention to their face, but it's almost like you don't want to see their body. Nowadays, if I photograph a curvier subject, based on their personal style, I might put them in a big, bold, colorful, patterned outfit. And so it's not about diminishing the person, but showing who they are. Very often in portraits, I begin with a dark, solid black outfit, something that's simple, not because I'm trying to hide their body or not, but instead I want to draw attention to their face. And then after that, I create images based on style and personality. So as we go into the next examples, it's not about do's or don'ts, but it's about the knowledge that you'll have to understand how clothing choice directs the viewer's eye in the frame. To set the scene, I want to tell you a little bit about my background and lighting choice because this video is not about those things. I want you to pay attention to the clothing. So first of all, I picked a pretty simple neutral background. We're using hand-painted canvas backgrounds in a neutral color, kind of that subtle warm brown. And then I've used relatively flat light. On the right-hand side of the frame, I'm taking a light and I'm pointing it back to the corner of the room so that it spreads out and fills in all the shadows, so it's just very soft. And then we also have a medium umbrella with diffusion back behind the background, pointed at the subject to act as a hair light. So this is a lovely setup if I want a portrait that is maybe personal branding that allows the subject to move quite a bit, but still keeping consistent light from head to toe. All right, so now that we've talked about the lighting, let's get to the meat of this video, which is the clothing. I'm going to begin by taking a frame of Sydney's first look, and then we're going to see where our eye goes throughout the photograph. I'm going to begin by asking you the question, where are you looking in the photograph first? Because there's a couple of concepts going on here. Well, first of all, I think you look first at her face. Remember what I said before, that's where we're going to begin by looking. But then our eye is drawn to pattern. The bright pattern at the skirt on the bottom is going to grab our attention. That's one of the things that our brain is trained to look for is repetition and pattern. And the next area that I believe you might look would be an area of contrast. So where the sweater meets the skirt, that contrast there is going to drag our attention. So what happens is first I look at her face, then I look down at the bottom of the frame, and then I look at the midsection. Because the top is solid, dark, very little detail, it is the last thing that we look at. And so this will make a big difference of where I'm looking in the frame. One other thing I wanted to note is that because the sweater is slightly oversized in the way her arms are hanging, it actually makes the frame of her body look a bit larger, and this is due to mergers. Her arms are merging with the side of the clothing, and so it all looks like one solid area. So if I were posing my subject, what I might do to draw more attention up to the top of the frame is maybe create a little shape with her arms, or perhaps even add a little movement to the hair in order to take our eye from the bottom of the frame and move it upward. Let's look at the shot now that we've adjusted the pose. At the bottom of the frame, our subject has bent one knee over, creating something called a narrowing point. So it actually makes the body smaller at the bottom of the frame, and this creates a little bit better visual balance. By bringing her hands up to her face, not only do we create a little bit of separation between the shirt and the sides of the body, but our eyes are also trained to look at hands. So by lifting her hand up, we are brought back up to her face, and by having a little bit of movement in the hair, that is another thing that is attracting our attention. So as you can see, clothing is one consideration, but it works in conjunction with your subject's pose. All right, so let's move on to Sydney's second look. Our next clothing considerations are color and detail. Let me take a shot to show you what I'm talking about. All right, so where's your eye looking in this photograph? Of course, I'm immediately looking at her face and that amazing hair. But then our eye is drawn to the most saturated colors in the photograph, which of course is the shirt. So as you can see, I look at her face, then the shirt. Very little attention is being paid to the pants because they're darker and less detail, which actually brings me to the next note. Is not only are we going to look at color, but we're looking at areas of detail. We can't help it. Things like lace or beads or ruffles. So in this example, for the clothing, we're looking at the ruffles on the shoulders, the ruching in the center on the chest, as well as the ruffles at the bottom of the shirt. All of those things are areas of attention. It's kind of like, it's like visual candy for us. Like it's more detailed to look at. And so that's going to direct our eye in the frame. And so for example, if I want more attention to be drawn to a bottom of the frame, maybe putting more detail or texture towards the bottom of the frame will help me achieve that. Or if I want to draw the attention back up towards the face, it could be earrings or necklace. It's those sorts of detail that direct our eye. Same thing as if you wanted to emphasize the chest, having a little bit of rouging or detail in the center is going to direct our eye there as well. Now, before I actually make a real image out of this, there's something that I want to tweak. Very often when I shoot, I keep just these little clamps on set. And what I'll do is I will clamp the clothing in a way that helps me create what I think are more pleasing lines. So for example, in the first setup, in the first shot, when my subject was posing, if no matter how she posed, the arms were merging with the side of the body, if I wanted a little bit of negative space, I might clamp the clothing to allow me to get those lines. Here, when I look at the photograph, I really see that her torso looks pretty rectangular based on the shape of the clothing. So I might use this clamp to come around behind and just lightly clamp at the waist. It'll give just a slight narrowing point, which can be more pleasing to the eye. Lovely. Okay. All right, so you can see now there's just a little bit more of negative space between her arms and the side of the body, which creates just a little bit of a waist, which I think is going to be quite flattering for this photograph. So now I'm going to go in and take a couple photos of her. Now this video is not dedicated to posing, but for example, if I felt that there was more attention going to the ruffles at the bottom of the shirt than I wanted, one thing I might do is lean the subject closer to camera and put those ruffles further away. What is further from the camera looks smaller and gets less attention. These are all things I'm thinking about as I'm trying to flatter my subject in a photograph. Okay, so. So you can see in this shot that the position of the subject's legs has created a narrowing point again, and then by leaning the subject a little bit closer to camera, it's bringing even more attention back to her face. But in the end, we look at face first, saturated color, detail, and then finally darker areas at the bottom of the frame. For Sydney's third and final look, we have several different things vying for our attention. Let me take a shot. As with before, the first thing that we look at is her face, her beautiful hair, but then we have several different elements that are grabbing our attention. So first of all, let's talk about the top, the shirt. We have contrast. The contrast between the black and white stripes is immediately grabbing our attention. We also have the detail of the strings that are across the shirt. But then we also have to talk about size, and that's something we've not talked about quite as much before, is when anything is larger in the frame, that automatically is going to get more of our attention. And this could be many different things. It could be bigger hair will get our attention, bigger ruffles on a shirt, or a bigger part of a dress. So for example, regularly, if I am photographing a large dress so it fills the bottom of the frame, Well, the image feels off balance, especially if the subject's like hair is pulled back tight. Their head might look small in the frame and all I'm looking at is the fullness of the dress at the bottom. So what do I do to balance out that composition? Maybe I put a hat on the subject, or I pose with the hands up near the top of the head, or I have full hair, something to balance out the size. And so in this instance, we have the black pants, and because they're dark and they're black, that's not gathering much attention, but they are wide leg, large pants. And so visually in the frame, they are actually grabbing our eye quite a little bit. So there are many different things grabbing our attention. And so what I have to figure out is how can I get the viewer's eye to be where I want it to be? So for example, I want more attention to her face. Is it the fullness of the hair? Is it hand to the face? In this example, I'm looking a lot at that texture in the middle of the shirt. Maybe I find that distracting. So perhaps there's a way with the pose that we obscure it a little bit and then use the hands again to bring the eye back to the face. Or maybe we want to show off the wide leg pants, and so we can do steps, add a little movement to the frame. So let me take a shot and try to balance it out, maybe where I bring the eye up a little bit more. So you can see the placement of the arms does a lot to direct the eye. The arm across the body hides a lot of that detail that was gathering our attention, and the hand towards the face draws our eye up that direction. But look at the bottom of the frame with the legs. When her legs were closer together, the pants appear smaller. Gets a little less attention compositionally. But when she puts her legs further apart, it fills the frame more and it actually becomes quite dominant in the frame. So this is why not only is it lightness and contrast and color and detail and texture, but also size as something you have to consider in your photos. So there you have it, 3 different outfits on our subject, and each one directs our eye in a slightly different place. We photographers so often fixate on things like our lighting and the depth of field and focus and all those technical elements, but we sometimes neglect the things that go in front of our camera, and one of the most important things for showcasing our subject, which is the clothing that they're wearing. And remember, it's not about do's and don'ts, but being mindful of what attracts our eye. So yes, it is things like color, brightness, contrast, detail, and size that you really want to notice in your images. And this doesn't mean that you need to change your subject's style, but instead you can adjust poses or your camera angle in order to flatter them and draw attention to where you want it to be, which in a portrait is usually the face. I hope you guys have found this video useful and you can use it to flatter your subject or direct the eye in your next portrait shoot. Now, if you want to see the gear used to make these images, be sure to check out the links in the description below. And if you've enjoyed tutorials like this, I've got 2 places for you to look. First, you can visit learnwithlindsay.com, where I have many tutorials that take you through everything from flattering your subject to lighting techniques and creativity. And then of course, you can look right here. You can subscribe to Adorama's YouTube channel because there are so many videos just like this one coming your way. See you next time, guys.